She was born to wear the crown, trained from childhood to rule with wisdom and grace. But in one devastating moment, Princess Eleonora lost everything, betrayed by her own sister, humiliated before the entire court, and cast out into a world she never truly knew existed. Now, living among the very people she once viewed only from castle balconies, Eleonora discovers the brutal truth of her family's reign. Villages burned, children conscripted, families torn apart by the crown she once revered. As she forms unlikely alliances with deserters and common folk alike, a new fire ignites within her, not for revenge, but for justice. But when Queen Sophia's ruthless pursuit leaves innocent villages in flames and forces Eleonora to confront her treacherous former love, she faces an impossible choice: reclaim her birthright through bloodshed, or become something the kingdom has never seen before, a ruler who truly understands what it means to serve. The golden glow of 1,000 torches bathed the great hall in warm, dancing light. Massive iron chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, dripping with beeswax candles that cast long, quivering shadows across the stone walls. The air was thick with the heady scent of mulled wine, cinnamon, and exotic spices brought from distant lands, a celebration fit for royalty. Princess Eleonora stood just outside the towering oak doors, her heart fluttering like a caged bird against her ribs. Tonight was to be her moment of triumph. Tonight, after years of preparation, of lessons in diplomacy and court etiquette, of practicing the perfect curtsy until her knees ached, she would be announced as the future bride of Prince Aldrich. Their kingdoms would unite, and she would one day wear the crown of both realms. Her ladies-in-waiting adjusted the folds of her azure silk gown, the color of loyalty, of trust. Tiny pearls cascaded from her bodice like tears of joy, catching the light with every anxious breath. Her golden hair, the envy of the court, had been braided with silver threads and adorned with fresh blossoms from the royal gardens. "You look divine, Your Highness," whispered Lady Agnes, her oldest companion. "The prince will be enchanted anew." Eleonora smiled, remembering the stolen moments with Aldrich in the castle gardens, his whispered promises, the way his eyes had lingered on her lips when he swore his devotion away from prying eyes. They had kept their affection secret until tonight, as royal custom demanded. The herald's staff struck the floor 3 times, commanding silence beyond the doors. Eleonora took one final, steadying breath. "His Royal Majesty King Edmund III wishes to announce a royal betrothal." The herald's voice boomed, cutting through the babble of courtly gossip. The doors swung open, the sea of nobles, merchants, and foreign dignitaries parted, creating a path straight to the dais where the king stood, resplendent in velvet and gold. Beside him, Prince Aldrich, tall, handsome, his eyes fixed not on Eleonora, but on some point beyond her. Something cold and heavy settled in Eleonora's stomach as she took her first step forward. Something was wrong. The prince should be smiling, should be looking at her with those warm brown eyes that had promised her the world. Instead, he stood rigid, his jaw tight, his gaze distant. The king raised his goblet. "Today we cement a most advantageous alliance. Prince Aldrich shall wed." Eleonora's lips parted in anticipation of hearing her name. Princess Sophia of Eastmere. The world stopped. The goblet in Eleonora's hand slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. Wine splashed across the hem of her perfect gown, bleeding through the silk like the betrayal bleeding through her heart. Sophia, her own sister? As if summoned by her thoughts, Sophia emerged from the shadows at the side of the hall. Eleonora hadn't even known she was at court. Sophia, with her raven hair and calculating eyes. Sophia, who had always coveted what Eleonora possessed. Sophia, now gliding forward in a crimson gown, the color of passion, of power, to take her place beside Prince Aldrich. A moment of stunned silence fell over the hall, then shattered into 1,000 whispers. "But I thought the elder princess—" "Did you see her face? How humiliating. The king must have changed his mind." Laughter, cruel, mocking laughter, rippled through the crowd. Ladies hid sneers behind painted fans. Knights exchanged knowing glances. The court, always hungry for scandal, feasted on her public disgrace. Eleonora stood frozen, a statue of shock in the center of the hall. Her gaze found Aldrich's, desperately searching for some explanation, some sign that this was all a terrible mistake. But the prince, the man who had sworn his love to her beneath the stars, looked through her as if she were nothing but air. With practiced grace, he took Sophia's pale hand and pressed his lips to it. The simple gesture was a dagger to Eleonora's heart. Every promise, every stolen kiss, every whispered plan for their future, all lies. Or worse, truths that had been easily abandoned for political advantage. Sophia's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Dear sister," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent hall, "aren't you going to congratulate us?" The words hung in the air like poison. Eleonora felt her throat closing, tears threatening to spill. She would not cry, not here, not where they could see her break. "Congratulations," she managed, the words scraping her throat like broken glass. "May your union be as sincere as your hearts." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs passed through the crowd. Even in her humiliation, Eleonora had managed to plant a seed of doubt. But it was a hollow victory. King Edmund frowned, gesturing impatiently for the musicians to resume playing. "Continue the celebration," he commanded, and just like that, the court turned away from Eleonora's pain, swept back into the rhythm of revelry. She stood alone in a sea of indifference, her very identity stripped away. No longer the future queen, no longer the beloved princess, no longer anything but a spectacle, an embarrassment to be forgotten by morning. The musicians played louder, as if to drown out the echoes of her shattered dreams. Courtiers twirled and laughed, while Aldrich led Sophia in the opening dance, their bodies moving in perfect practiced unison. Had he rehearsed with Sophia in secret, even as he was promising Eleonora the world? Unable to bear another moment of this torture, Eleonora gathered the tatters of her dignity and turned to leave. No one tried to stop her. No one even seemed to notice. Her footsteps echoed through the cold stone corridors, each one taking her further from everything she had believed to be her destiny. The sounds of celebration pursued her like mocking ghosts. The music, the laughter, the toasts to the happy couple. Tears finally came, hot and relentless, streaming down her face as she ran, not caring who might see. The guards at their posts stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice her disgrace. Servants flattened themselves against walls as she passed, their eyes downcast but hungry for gossip to spread below stairs. Eleonora reached her chambers and slammed the door, collapsing against it as sobs racked her body. Everything in the room mocked her. The wedding plans spread across her desk, the gifts she had begun to prepare for Aldrich, the gowns being made for her trousseau. Through her tears, she caught sight of her reflection in the silver mirror. The princess who stared back was unrecognizable, face blotched with tears, carefully arranged hair now falling in disarray, eyes haunted with betrayal. "I am still here," she whispered to her reflection, voice trembling. "I am still Eleonora." But who was Eleonora without her title, without her promised future? The question echoed in the emptiness of her chambers. As night deepened around the castle and the sounds of celebration finally began to fade, something changed in Eleonora's eyes. The tears dried. The trembling stopped. In their place, a small flame kindled, not of hope, not yet, but of something more primal, the will to survive, the refusal to disappear. "They will not forget me," she whispered to the darkness. "This is not how my story ends." Little did she know that, at that very moment, her sister was not content merely with stealing her crown and her love. In the shadows of the corridor outside Eleonora's chambers, Sophia whispered instructions to two of the castle guards, her voice low and urgent. "Follow her, wherever she goes, and when the moment is right." Her fingers traced a line across her throat, the gesture leaving no doubt as to her meaning. The guards nodded, their faces impassive. Just another duty for the crown. For Sophia, a stolen throne was not enough. A rival, even a disgraced one, could never be allowed to live. The castle gates creaked open just enough for a single figure to be thrust through before slamming shut with brutal finality. Princess Eleonora stumbled forward, nearly falling onto the muddy road, her thin silk slippers immediately soaked through with icy water. Dawn was still hours away, and the night air cut through her inadequate clothing. Only a light cloak hastily thrown over her shoulders covered the same azure gown from the banquet, now stained and torn. "By order of the soon-to-be Queen Sophia, you are banished from these lands," growled the captain of the guard, a man who had once bowed low when she passed. "Return, and it will be your head on a spike above these very gates." Eleonora turned, her golden hair whipping in the bitter wind. "My father, the king, would never." "The king has taken ill suddenly," the guard interrupted, his face impassive in the torchlight. "The princess, your sister, now speaks with his authority." Sudden illness. Eleonora understood the implication immediately. Her father hadn't merely betrayed her, he had likely been poisoned into compliance, or worse. The realization sent ice through her veins, colder than any winter wind. "You know this is wrong," she whispered, searching the familiar faces of the guards who had protected her since childhood. Not one would meet her eye. The captain's face flickered with something like regret before hardening once more. "Move on, my lady, while you still can." With these words hanging in the frigid air, the guards retreated behind the safety of the walls, leaving Eleonora truly alone for the first time in her life. The pale moon emerged briefly from behind scudding clouds, illuminating the rutted road stretching before her. In the far distance, the glow of the castle's celebration fires still burned bright. The faint sounds of music carried on the wind, a cruel reminder of the life that had been stolen from her mere hours ago. Eleonora clutched her thin cloak tighter as the first drops of rain began to fall. She had no destination, no plan, no allies. Just the clothes on her back and the jeweled hairpins still tangled in her once elaborate coiffure. Perhaps enough to buy food for a few days, if she could find someone willing to trade with a disgraced noble. She forced her feet to move, one painful step after another. Her slippers, designed for dancing on polished marble floors, provided no protection against the sharp stones and thorns of the road. Soon her footprints left traces of blood on the muddy path, but she pressed on, driven by something more powerful than pain: survival. Twice ornate carriages thundered past, splashing her with mud and refuse. Their occupants, nobles returning from the celebration, looked straight through her, as though she had already ceased to exist. These were people who had bowed before her that very morning, who had sought her favor and smiled at her words. "The world turns quickly," she murmured to herself, wiping mud from her face with the back of a trembling hand. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Eleonora had reached the outskirts of Oakvale, the closest village to the castle. Pain shot through her feet with each step, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She had never gone this long without food, never walked this far without rest. The village was already stirring, bakers stoking their ovens, farmers leading livestock to pasture, apprentices trudging to their masters' workshops. Normal life continuing as though her world hadn't shattered. A group of children playing with sticks in the mud spotted her first. Their game stopped abruptly as they stared. Then whispers flew between them. "It's her, the fallen princess, the one who wasn't good enough. My ma says she's cursed now." Their innocent cruelty pierced deeper than she could have imagined. News traveled faster than she had. Somehow the story of her disgrace had already reached even this small village. Eleonora straightened her back, summoning what dignity remained to her as she limped into the village square. Women drawing water from the well paused to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Men unloading carts stopped to watch her pass, some spitting at the ground near her feet. "Your fancy dress won't feed you here, princess," called one woman to scattered laughter. "Maybe she can marry my son instead," shouted another, eliciting cruel guffaws. Eleonora kept her eyes forward, though each barb found its mark. She had spent her life being adored, or at least pretending to be. This naked hostility was foreign territory. Near the center of the village stood a forge, its chimney already belching smoke into the morning air. The rhythmic ringing of hammer on anvil drew her forward, perhaps because it was the only sound that wasn't mocking laughter or whispered judgment. The blacksmith, a broad-shouldered man with arms like tree trunks and a beard streaked with soot and gray, looked up as her shadow fell across his workspace. His weathered face betrayed no surprise, though his eyes, keen and intelligent, took in her bedraggled state in one comprehensive glance. "So," he said, setting down his hammer, "the castle has spit you out." Eleonora lifted her chin. "I seek lodging for the night. I can pay." Her hand moved to one of her hairpins. The blacksmith snorted. "Your baubles are worth nothing here, girl. Here, the name of royalty carries no weight. Only work matters." His words weren't cruel, merely matter of fact, yet they struck Eleonora with the force of revelation. For the first time, she understood that everything she had valued, her title, her bloodline, her position at court, meant nothing in this new reality. I can work," she said, the words strange in her mouth. "Tell me what to do." Something like approval flickered in the blacksmith's eyes. "The stables need mucking out. Water needs carrying from the well." "The floor hasn't seen a proper scrubbing in more moons than I care to count." He gestured to a bucket and brush leaning against the wall. "Start there. We'll see what you're made of, princess." That day, Eleonora learned the weight of a full water bucket, the sting of lye soap on cracked hands, the ache of kneeling on hard stone floors. By midday, her once elegant gown was soaked with dirty water and sweat. By evening, her palms were raw and bleeding, her knees bruised, her back screaming in protest. But inside, something strange was happening. With each painful task completed, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar. Pride, perhaps. Not the pride of birthright or position, but the simple satisfaction of work completed by her own hands. As darkness fell, the blacksmith's wife, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, silently pushed a bowl of stew and a chunk of dark bread toward Eleonora. The simple meal tasted better than any royal feast she could remember. That night, curled on a straw pallet in the corner of their small home, Eleonora examined her bleeding hands in the moonlight. These same hands had once held nothing heavier than a fan or a goblet. Now they were becoming workers' hands, strong, capable, real. "Perhaps this is what it means to be human," she whispered to herself. "Not just a title." She fell into exhausted sleep, unaware of the shadow that passed by the small window, or the quiet conversation taking place outside between the blacksmith and a stranger on horseback. Dawn had barely broken when the blacksmith shook her awake, his face grave. "Take this," he said, pressing a small sack into her hands. Inside, she found a loaf of bread, a hunk of cheese, and a crude map scratched onto a scrap of leather. "Follow the river south. There's a place where even fallen royalty might find sanctuary." Eleonora blinked sleep from her eyes. "I don't understand." "The work is done," he interrupted. "You've proved yourself capable enough, but you can't stay here." His voice dropped to a whisper, urgency making it harsh. "They're here, looking for you." Fear, cold and immediate, flooded her veins. "Who?" "Men with swords and the Queen-to-be's seal," he answered, already pushing her toward the back door. "They're asking questions at the tavern. It won't be long before they come here." Eleonora clutched the sack to her chest. "Why help me? You don't even know me." The blacksmith's weathered face softened briefly. "I know tyranny when I see it. Now go. Flee. They're already here after you." The bustling marketplace of Riverton engulfed Eleonora in a sea of unfamiliar sensations. Merchants' cries competed with the bleating of goats and squawking of chickens in wicker cages. The pungent blend of spices, livestock, sweat, and freshly baked bread assaulted her senses, so different from the carefully perfumed halls of the castle she once called home. 2 weeks had passed since her desperate flight from Oakvale, following the river south as the blacksmith had instructed. Gone was the azure silk gown of her disgrace. In its place, a simple brown homespun dress and sturdy leather boots purchased with one of her jeweled hairpins. The merchant had eyed her suspiciously but asked no questions, his greed overcoming his curiosity. Her once golden hair, the pride of the court, was now hidden beneath a rough linen cap, darkened with walnut juice to disguise its distinctive hue. Eleonora moved cautiously through the crowd, one hand perpetually guarding the small pouch that held her remaining coins. She had learned this lesson 3 days prior, when a quick-fingered boy had nearly relieved her of her last hairpin. In the castle, she had never needed to count coins or worry about thieves. Here, every copper piece was precious, hard-won, and easily lost. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven, called a round-faced baker woman, her forearms dusted with flour. The scent drew Eleonora forward before she could stop herself. "How much?" she asked, wincing internally at her own accent, still too refined, too obviously not of this place. The woman squinted at her. 3 coppers for a small loaf, 6 for a large. Eleonora counted the coins in her pouch. 17 coppers remained, all that stood between her and starvation. Simple arithmetic that she had never needed to master now governed her survival. "The small, please," she decided, reluctantly parting with 3 precious coins. The weight of the warm bread in her hands was a comfort like nothing she had known before. In the castle, bread had been merely a vehicle for exotic jams or an accompaniment to soups served in golden bowls. Now it represented another day of life. Finding a relatively clean spot near a wall, Eleonora sat and broke the crust, savoring the simple pleasure of sustenance. Around her, the marketplace continued its chaotic dance. Farmers haggling over the price of grain, children darting between stalls, lovers stealing kisses behind carts laden with vegetables. "Care to share?" croaked a voice beside her. Eleonora turned to find an elderly woman huddled against the same wall, her wrinkled face marked by years of sun and hardship, her clothes patched so many times it was impossible to determine their original color. The old Eleonora, Princess Eleonora, might have recoiled from such a request. But hunger had taught her empathy in ways that royal tutors never could. "Of course," she said, breaking her precious loaf and offering half. The old woman accepted with gnarled hands that spoke of decades of labor. "Kind of you," she murmured. "Not many show kindness these days, not with the new taxes." "New taxes?" Eleonora asked, curiosity piqued. The woman snorted. "Where have you been hiding, girl? The crown doubled the grain tax last harvest, then added a new tax on wool this spring. Word is they're preparing for war, though against whom nobody knows." She tore at the bread with surprisingly strong teeth. "My son couldn't pay. They took his youngest boy for the army instead. 14 years old he was. We've had no word since." Horror crawled up Eleonora's spine. These couldn't be her father's policies. He had always been firm but fair in his governance. But if he was truly ill, or worse, "I'm sorry about your grandson," she said softly. The old woman shrugged, the resignation in the gesture more heartbreaking than tears would have been. "We're just common folk. Our sorrows don't matter to those with crowns and castles." The words struck Eleonora like a physical blow. Had she ever truly considered the struggles of the people she had been born to rule? Had she ever questioned where the gold that filled the royal coffers originated? The silk of her gowns, the jewels in her hair, the sumptuous feasts, all had come from somewhere, from someone. "They should matter," she whispered, more to herself than to the woman beside her. Days turned to weeks as Eleonora learned to navigate her new existence. She found work where she could, sweeping the tavern floor for a few coppers, helping a tanner's wife stir vats of foul-smelling liquid, even joining a group of women washing clothes in the river, her soft hands gradually hardening with calluses from the harsh lye soap. The tavern became her education, a raucous classroom where the true state of the kingdom revealed itself in bitter conversations and drunken complaints. She learned to keep her head down, to serve ale without spilling, to deflect wandering hands with practiced ease, and above all, to listen. "Took my entire harvest, they did," lamented a farmer, deep in his cups. "Said it was for the war effort. War against our own bloody stomachs, more like." "My Marta was called to the castle as a serving girl," added another, his voice hollow. 3 months gone, and not a word. The other girls who returned say strange things happen in those halls now. Dark things. "It wasn't like this under old King Edmund," sighed an elderly merchant. "Before he took ill, before that younger princess got her claws into everything." Each story was a knife to Eleonora's heart. This was her family's legacy, not the glorious history recounted by court chroniclers, but the real impact of royal whims on real lives. Had her father known? Had she herself been complicit through her ignorance? One misty evening, as smoke from cook fires hung low over the town's thatched roofs, Eleonora found herself drawn to the small village square where a traveling storyteller had set up by the well. Children sat cross-legged on the damp ground, their eyes wide as the old man spun tales of dragons and knights. When his fantastical stories ended, an unexpected request came from the back of the crowd. "Tell us about the lost princess," called a voice. "The one who disappeared." Eleonora froze, her heart stuttering. The storyteller's eyes glinted in the torchlight. Ah, a tale fresh in the making. He leaned forward dramatically. "They say Princess Eleonora was cast out after trying to poison her sister out of jealousy." Gasps rose from the crowd. "That's not the version I heard," interrupted a woman nursing an infant. "My cousin serves at the castle. She says the princess discovered some dark secret and was silenced before she could speak." "Nonsense," argued a blacksmith's apprentice. "Everyone knows she fled with a forbidden lover." Eleonora stood transfixed as her own story was transformed into legend before her eyes. None of the versions remotely true, yet each revealing something about the hopes and fears of those who believed them. "I heard she lives among us now," said an old woman suddenly, the same one Eleonora had shared bread with weeks ago. Her piercing gaze found Eleonora in the crowd, learning what it means to suffer as we suffer. A chill ran down Eleonora's spine as the old woman held her gaze for one long, knowing moment before looking away. Had she been recognized? The moment passed without consequence, but left Eleonora shaken. Later that night, as she lay on her pallet in the corner of the tavern's kitchen, payment for her evening's work, Eleonora stared at the smoke-blackened ceiling and truly understood for the first time that she had become part of something larger than herself. Not a princess, but one thread in the complex tapestry of common life. The realization was both humbling and oddly liberating. She had lost a crown, but gained a perspective no ruler before her had possessed. If, a fragile, dangerous if, she ever found her way back to power, she would carry these lessons with her. The weight of bread in hungry hands, the resignation in an old woman's shrug, the bitter taste of injustice in a farmer's lament. As dawn approached, bringing with it the smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door, Eleonora drifted toward sleep, unaware that her growing legend was spreading through the kingdom like wildfire, and that it had reached ears both sympathetic and dangerous. Outside the tavern, 4 cloaked figures observed the building in silence, their faces hidden in shadow. After a moment, one gestured to the others, and they melted into the pre-dawn darkness, moving with the practiced stealth of men who had seen battle. Their purpose, unknown to the sleeping princess, would soon change the course of her life once more. "Is it truly her?" whispered one. "It is," confirmed another. "The question now is what we do about it." "We give her a choice," said the tallest among them. "Flee forever to safety beyond the borders, or become the banner around which we rally." Eleonora's hands trembled as she wiped down the last of the tavern tables. The midnight hour long past. The patrons had finally staggered home, leaving behind spilled ale, scattered crumbs, and the lingering smell of sweat and cheap tallow candles. Her back ached from hours of serving drinks and dodging wandering hands, but she had earned 8 copper coins, enough for bread tomorrow and perhaps a new needle to mend her increasingly tattered dress. The tavern keeper's wife, a stern woman with unexpected kindness in her eyes, nodded toward the door. "Best be off then, girl. Dawn comes early, and so do the merchants wanting their breakfast." "Thank you, Mistress Mabel," Eleonora replied, tucking her precious coins into the small pouch hidden beneath her bodice. After nearly 3 weeks in Riverton, she had established a fragile routine: mornings at the baker's, afternoons washing linens at the river, evenings at the tavern. It wasn't the life she had been born to, but it was a life nonetheless. The night air bit through her thin shawl as she stepped outside. No stars pierced the clouded sky, leaving the narrow streets shrouded in an inky darkness broken only by the occasional lantern hanging from a shopfront. Eleonora moved confidently despite the gloom, having learned the path to her rented attic room by heart. She had taken only 3 steps when the shadows themselves seemed to move. "Don't scream," came a low voice as 4 hooded figures materialized around her, forming a tight circle that blocked any escape. Eleonora's hand flew to her hidden knife, a small blade she'd traded her last hairpin for after a drunken patron had followed her home one night. "I have nothing of value," she said, voice steadier than her racing heart. The tallest figure stepped forward, pushing back his hood to reveal a face marked by a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. Despite this fearsome appearance, his eyes held no malice. "You have something of immense value, Princess Eleonora," he said quietly. "Your birthright." Ice flooded her veins. After weeks of careful disguise and fabricated history, after believing herself safe in anonymity, she had been discovered. Were these Sophia's assassins finally catching up to her? Or perhaps bounty hunters looking to claim whatever reward her sister surely offered? "You're mistaken," she managed, fingers tightening on her knife. "I'm just a tavern maid." A second man removed his hood. Younger, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years under open skies. A tavern maid who carries herself like royalty even in rags, who speaks with the accent of the court despite her efforts to hide it. Who watches the castle road every morning as if waiting for news. The accuracy of his observations left her speechless. "We mean you no harm, Your Highness," said the scarred man. "May we speak somewhere less exposed?" Common sense told Eleonora to run, to scream, to fight, anything but follow strange men into the darkness. Yet something in their demeanor stayed her fear. If they had meant to kill her, why announce themselves? Why engage in conversation? "The stables," she decided, gesturing toward the building adjacent to the tavern. "The ostler sleeps deeply, but if you try anything, my screams will wake the entire street." The men nodded, following her silently into the hay-scented darkness of the stables. A single lantern hung from a post, casting long shadows across the sleeping horses and stacked bales. Eleonora positioned herself near the door, knife now visible in her hand. "Speak plainly," she commanded, her royal tone returning unbidden. "Who are you, and what do you want with me?" The four men exchanged glances before the scarred one spoke again. "I am Rowan, once captain of your father's 3rd Regiment." He touched his scar. "This was my reward for questioning orders I knew King Edmund would never give." "Gareth," said the younger man with a slight bow, "former royal scout." The other two introduced themselves similarly. Magnus, a castle guard who had served the royal family for 20 years, and Thorn, a bowman from the king's personal hunting party. All had been dismissed, imprisoned, or forced to flee when they showed reluctance to embrace Sophia's increasingly harsh regime. "We are not alone," Rowan continued. "Dozens of soldiers have deserted rather than enforce the new queen's cruelties. We've formed a camp in the forests beyond the northern marshes. Others join us each day, not just soldiers, but farmers who've lost lands to royal requisition, craftsmen whose guilds have been dissolved, mothers whose sons were taken for the army." Eleonora's mind reeled. "You're rebels?" "We are loyal subjects," corrected Magnus firmly, "to the true crown, to the laws of the realm as they were meant to be upheld." "And you think I'm what, your figurehead?" Eleonora laughed bitterly. "A fallen princess with no army, no allies at court, no gold." Rowan's scarred face remained solemn. "You are more than that, Your Highness. You are the rightful heir, but more importantly, you've now lived among the people. You've felt their suffering firsthand. The princess who left the castle would have made a fair queen, perhaps, but the woman who has worked alongside common folk, who has known hunger and fear and uncertainty, she could be a great one." His words stirred something deep within Eleonora. Not pride or ambition, but a sense of responsibility she had never fully grasped before. "The people are suffering," Gareth added, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Taxes rise weekly. Villages that cannot pay see their young men conscripted and their young women taken as servants to the castle. Many never return. Your father is seen less each day. Some say he's being poisoned slowly to maintain the fiction of his rule while your sister holds the real power." "And the prince?" Eleonora asked, hating herself for the way her heart still quickened at the thought of Aldrich despite his betrayal. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Prince Aldrich appears, conflicted," Thorn said carefully. "He signs the decrees placed before him, yet argues against the harshest measures in council. He drinks heavily now, and some nights can be heard shouting your name in his chambers. A complicated pain twisted in Eleonora's chest. Not quite hope, not quite vindication, but something dangerously close to both. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on the matter at hand. Rowan stepped forward, his voice lowering with intensity. "Join us. Be our leader, not just in name, but in truth. The common folk already whisper about the just princess who walks among them. Tavern songs spread about the rightful heir who will return to save them. Your legend grows even as you hide from it." "I'm no military commander," Eleonora protested. "I was trained to manage a household, to navigate court politics, to oversee ceremonies, not to lead rebellions." "We have soldiers enough," Magnus said. "What we lack is a cause people will die for. You are that cause." The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. These men, soldiers who had likely killed in battle, men hardened by war and discipline, were offering their lives to her purpose. It was a responsibility far greater than any she had been prepared for. "If I refuse?" she asked quietly. "If I choose to disappear, to start anew somewhere beyond my sister's reach, then we'll ensure your safe passage to the Eastern Kingdoms," Rowan replied without hesitation. "We'll ask nothing more of you and continue our fight as best we can." The simplicity of the choice belied its magnitude. Disappear and live, perhaps happily, certainly safely, or step into a role that might well lead to her death, but might also save countless lives if successful. Gareth, the youngest of the four, suddenly dropped to one knee before her, his head bowed. "If you command, we will die for you," he said, his voice ringing with conviction in the quiet stable. The sight of this proud soldier kneeling in the dirty straw, offering his life to her cause, struck Eleonora with the force of a physical blow. She had never earned such loyalty. It had always been given to her title, to her position, never to her person. Tears pricked at her eyes as she realized the terrible responsibility of holding others' lives in her hands. This wasn't about reclaiming a crown or avenging her humiliation. It was about the old woman who had shared her bread, the farmer who lost his harvest, the mother whose son never returned from war. "I don't want death," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Not yours, not anyone's. I want justice." The words hung in the lantern-lit darkness, simple yet profound. One by one, the other men knelt beside Gareth, heads bowed in an oath of fealty more meaningful than any ceremonial pledge in the castle's great hall had ever been. As dawn's first light began to filter through the stable slats, a messenger arrived, breathless at the door, his eyes wide with urgency as he whispered news to Rowan. The scarred captain's face darkened as he turned to Eleonora. "Your Highness," he said grimly, "your sister the Queen has just made a royal proclamation. Princess Eleonora is officially declared dead, killed by bandits while fleeing the kingdom in disgrace." The Painted Swan Tavern hummed with subdued conversation as dusk settled over the village of Millbrook. Rain pattered against warped window panes, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the murmurs of farmers and craftsmen gathering after a long day's labor. A traveling bard sat in the corner, fingers idly plucking at his lute strings as he waited for the crowd to grow. "Another tale of dragons and knights?" called out the tavern keeper, wiping a tankard with a dubiously clean cloth. The bard smiled, revealing a gap-toothed grin. "I've something fresher tonight, good folk. A tale still unfolding across our troubled land." Interest stirred through the room. News stories were rare treasures in these remote villages, where news traveled slowly and often arrived distorted beyond recognition. "They say," the bard began, his voice dropping dramatically, "that a princess walks among us." Eleonora, seated in the darkest corner with her hood pulled low, stiffened. 2 months had passed since her death had been proclaimed throughout the kingdom. 2 months of careful movement between villages, of whispered conversations with local leaders, of building a network of eyes and ears loyal not to a crown, but to an idea. "Not just any princess," continued the bard, strumming a melancholy chord, "but one betrayed by her own blood, cast out to die, yet refusing death's cold embrace." The tavern had fallen silent, all eyes fixed on the performer. Even the barmaid paused in her rounds, tankards forgotten in her hands. "They call her the crownless queen," the bard sang softly. "The true heart of the realm who walks dusty roads in peasant's garb, who knows hunger as her people know it, who listens where others command." Eleonora watched as the patrons leaned forward, faces rapt with attention. This was happening everywhere now. Stories spreading from village to village, changing slightly with each retelling, yet maintaining their core. A rightful heir living among the people, learning their sufferings, preparing to return. Some versions painted her as a mystical figure with supernatural powers. Others, closer to truth, told of a woman humbled by exile, transformed by the very hardship meant to destroy her. All spoke of inevitable return and restoration of justice. What none of them knew was that their subject sat among them, sipping watered ale and memorizing faces, making mental notes of which stories sparked the most hope, which grievances burned hottest, which villages suffered most under Sophia's increasingly tyrannical rule. "My cousin says she came to their village last month," whispered a miller to his companion, loud enough for Eleonora to overhear. "Helped deliver a breech birth when the midwife couldn't be found." "The babe lived, and they named her Eleonora in her honor." "That wasn't her," scoffed his friend. "She was seen in the western provinces, organizing resistance against the grain collectors." The bard finished his ballad to enthusiastic applause, moving seamlessly into a ribald tune about a farmer's daughter and a knight. The mood lightened, but Eleonora noticed how many patrons continued to discuss the crownless queen in hushed, reverent tones. She caught Rowan's eye across the room where he sat disguised as a common laborer. The slightest nod passed between them. Another village where sentiment favored their cause. Another place where seeds of resistance could be planted. As the evening wore on, Eleonora slipped outside to breathe the cool night air. Stars pierced the cloudy sky where the rain had passed, their reflections shimmering in puddles along the muddy street. So different from the view from her castle balcony, yet somehow more immediate, more real. "My lady," came a whispered voice. Eleonora turned to find an elderly woman standing in the shadow of the tavern wall. Her face was deeply lined, her back bent with age, yet her eyes held a fierce intelligence. "You mistake me for someone else, grandmother," Eleonora replied cautiously. The old woman smiled, revealing surprisingly strong teeth. "I mistake nothing. These old eyes see clearly enough." She glanced around to ensure they were alone. "I served in the castle kitchens for 40 years before my hands grew too gnarled for kneading. I watched you grow from a babe in arms to the woman who stands before me." Eleonora's hand moved instinctively to the knife hidden in her belt, but the woman made no threatening movement. "I've not come to expose you, child," she continued, "but to warn you. The Queen's men came through yesterday, questioning and threatening. They seek not just you now, but anyone who speaks your name with hope." "The villages suffer," Eleonora said quietly. The old woman's expression hardened. "Aye, they do. Worse than you've yet seen. 3 young men were hanged in Oakmere last week for refusing to surrender their family's last sheep to the tax collectors. In Westbury, a mother who protested her daughter being taken for castle service had her tongue cut out in the village square. Each word was a knife to Eleonora's heart. These atrocities were being committed in her father's name, or at least under his seal, by her own sister, against people who had no defense, no recourse. "Why tell me this?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Because," the old woman said, suddenly grasping Eleonora's hand in her gnarled fingers, "you are what they need. Not just another noble, promising change from a comfortable throne. You are one who has lived among them, suffered with them." Her grip tightened with surprising strength. "Now you suffer as we suffer." The simple statement echoed in Eleonora's mind long after the woman had disappeared back into the night. It was true. She was no longer merely a displaced princess seeking to reclaim her birthright. Something deeper had taken root within her, a genuine connection to the people she had once viewed only from the remove of privilege. Inside the tavern, a commotion erupted. Eleonora slipped back through the door to find a village priest standing in the center of the room, his face flushed with righteous anger. "Blasphemy and treason!" he he shouted, pointing at the bard. "Spreading lies about a dead princess! The Queen's justice will fall upon this place!" The tavern had divided, some patrons shrinking away in fear, others rising in defiance. The tension was palpable, a powder keg needing only a spark. "The true blasphemy," called a farmer from the back, "is what happens in that castle while our children starve." "Careful, Willem," warned his neighbor. "Those words could cost your head." The priest turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Who speaks against our divinely appointed queen? Show yourself." Eleonora held her breath, watching the scene unfold. This was happening everywhere, the realm fracturing between those loyal to the crown by fear or benefit, and those who suffered under its increasingly cruel demands. Villages, families, even marriages were being torn apart by the growing divide. Before the situation could escalate further, the tavern door burst open. A young boy, no more than 12, rushed in, his face streaked with tears and soot. "They're burning Oakvale," he gasped. "The Queen's soldiers. They say the village harbored traitors." Silence fell like a physical weight. Oakvale, the first village where Eleonora had found shelter after her expulsion, where the blacksmith had warned her of pursuit and saved her life. "How many dead?" someone finally asked. The boy shook his head. "Don't know. They're not letting anyone leave. My father boosted me over the wall to run for help." The priest backed toward the door, his earlier bravado fading. "This is what comes of rebellion," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. As the tavern erupted into panicked discussion, Eleonora caught Rowan's eye again. No words were needed. Their timeline had just accelerated. What had been a slow building of support, a careful gathering of allies, now demanded immediate action. People were dying for merely speaking her name, for harboring hope of her return. Later that night, in the abandoned barn where her small band of followers had made temporary camp, Eleonora faced her most loyal supporters. "We cannot wait any longer," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "Every day we hesitate, more innocent blood is spilled." "We're not ready," Gareth cautioned. "Our numbers grow, but we're scattered across too many villages. The Queen's army is well trained, well armed." "And increasingly hated," interrupted Thorne. "Half their forces are conscripts who'd rather be home tending their fields." Magnus spread a crude map across an upturned barrel. "We've loyal eyes and ears in 23 villages now, small bands of fighters in 14. But to challenge the castle directly would be suicide." Eleonora studied the map, her mind racing. "We don't need to take the castle. Not yet. We need to become more than just rumors and tavern songs. The people need to see that resistance is possible." As discussion continued late into the night, a messenger arrived, breathless and mud-spattered from hard riding. "Your Highness," he said, bowing despite his exhaustion. "News from the castle. Prince Aldrich was overheard arguing with the Queen. Witnesses say he called her rule a mockery of justice and spoke your name." A complicated emotion flooded Eleonora's chest. Not quite hope, not quite vindication, but a painful mixture of both. "There's more," the messenger continued. He was seen in the royal library, studying old maps of the castle's hidden passages, the same ones that lead beyond the walls. The implications hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. "He seeks to escape," Rowan said finally, "perhaps to find you." "Or to lure you into a trap," countered Magnus warily. Eleonora closed her eyes, seeing again the face of the prince who had betrayed her, who had stood silently by as her world crumbled. The same prince who had whispered promises under starlight, who had once claimed her heart as surely as her sister had claimed her crown. "If he truly regrets his choice," she said softly, "he must prove it with more than words spoken in anger." Outside, the wind carried distant sounds of celebration from the village, common folk finding brief solace in ale and music despite the darkness of their times. The realm teetered on the edge of open conflict, with Eleonora's name becoming both battle cry and benediction among those who dared to hope for change. The kingdom, without knowing it, was choosing sides in a struggle yet to be openly declared. The abandoned hunting lodge creaked and sighed against the autumn wind, its timber walls offering meager protection against the encroaching cold. Once a place of royal leisure, where Eleonora's father had entertained nobles during summer hunts. It now served as the most recent headquarters for what common folk had begun calling the Princess's Army. Maps covered the worn oak table, detailed renderings of the surrounding provinces marked with the locations of Queen Sophia's garrisons, tax collection routes, and villages known to be sympathetic to Eleonora's cause. 3 months of careful planning, of building networks of messengers and spies, had transformed a handful of deserters into the beginnings of an organized resistance. Eleonora studied the largest map, her finger tracing the road leading to the castle. Her appearance had changed dramatically since her exile. Her once soft hands now calloused, her fair skin weathered from months of outdoor living, her golden hair now kept short beneath a leather cap. Only her eyes remained the same, determined, intelligent, and increasingly haunted by the weight of lives depending on her decisions. The garrison at Westbrook was stripped down to 20 men, reported Gareth, pushing through the door with a gust of cold air. The Queen has ordered more troops to the northern border. Which makes no sense, Magnus growled, jabbing a finger at the map. There's no threat from the north. Our neighbors there have been peaceful for generations. It's a pretext, Eleonora said quietly. She needs justification for the increased taxes, the conscriptions. An external threat is convenient. The door opened again, admitting Rowan and a hooded messenger. The scarred captain's expression was tense, his jaw rigid with suppressed emotion. Your Highness, he said formally, unusual for their private councils. This man brings news from the castle, news that concerns Prince Aldrich. Eleonora's heart quickened traitorously at the name. Speak, she commanded the messenger, struggling to keep her voice neutral. The man pulled back his hood, revealing the weathered face of a castle servant. I serve in the royal kitchens, Your Highness. The prince's meals pass through my hands daily. He glanced nervously at the others before continuing. For weeks now, he has barely eaten. He drinks heavily, argues openly with the Queen, and twice I have seen him with bruises he tries to conceal. The Queen's work? Thorne asked. The servant nodded. Her personal guards, at her command. The prince's position grows more precarious by the day. The court whispers that he regrets his marriage, that he speaks your name in his cups. A complex storm of emotions swept through Eleonora. Anger, vindication, unwanted concern for the man who had betrayed her so publicly. She forced herself to focus on the strategic implications rather than the personal ones. Does this change anything for us? She asked her advisors. Rowan and Magnus exchanged meaningful glances. It might, Rowan said cautiously. A divided royal house presents opportunities. If the prince truly regrets his allegiance to Sophia, he could become an asset. Or a liability, countered Thorne. A trap designed to appeal to the princess's former affections. The implied criticism stung, though Eleonora kept her expression impassive. Her feelings toward Aldrich remained a tangled knot she had pushed aside rather than unraveled. There had been no time for personal wounds when entire villages suffered under her sister's increasingly tyrannical rule. Either way, she said firmly, we cannot base our plans on the prince's discontent. The people cannot eat regrets. They need action. The discussion continued late into the night, the wind's howl intensifying as if echoing the rising tensions within the kingdom. Reports from across the realm painted a grim picture. Villages burned for harboring traitors, young men conscripted by force, crops confiscated under the pretense of supporting a non-existent war effort. Queen Sophia's rule had descended from mere betrayal into outright tyranny. Near midnight, when most had retired to their pallets, Eleonora remained at the table, studying the maps by candlelight. The flickering flame cast her shadow large against the wall, a wavering specter of the queen she might become, or the martyr she might yet be. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rowan entered, his scarred face grave in the dim light. There's someone here to see you, he said quietly. Someone who risked everything to find you. Eleonora's hand moved instinctively to the dagger at her belt. Who? Rowan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Prince Aldrich. The name hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Eleonora felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back with angry heat. Is this some kind of jest? She demanded. I wish it were, Rowan replied. He arrived an hour ago, alone and half frozen. Gareth has him under guard in the stable. This could be a trap, Eleonora said, though her mind raced with other possibilities. He could have been followed. We've scouts for 2 miles in every direction. If Sophia's forces were near, we'd know. Rowan paused, then added reluctantly, he asks only to speak with you. After that, he says, you can hang him as a traitor if you wish. The audacity of it struck Eleonora like a physical blow. After everything, the public humiliation, the theft of her birthright, the months of hardship and danger, Aldrich thought he could simply appear and request an audience. Bring him, she said finally, her voice cold, but disarmed and guarded. When the stable door opened 10 minutes later, Eleonora was seated at the table, deliberately positioned to appear as the authority she was gradually becoming. She would not stand for him, would not show any deference to the royal title he still carried. The man who entered between 2 armed guards barely resembled the proud prince who had stood beside Sophia at the betrothal feast. Aldrich's fine clothes were travel-stained and torn. His once immaculate beard now unkempt, dark circles shadowing his eyes. A healing cut marked his cheekbone, and he moved with the stiffness of someone nursing older injuries. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment the months fell away. Eleonora remembered summer afternoons in the castle gardens, whispered promises under star-filled skies, the brush of his fingers against hers during court dances when no one was watching. She crushed those memories ruthlessly. You have 1 minute to explain why I shouldn't order your execution, she said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Aldrich made no move to approach closer. I deserve nothing less, he admitted, his voice rough from cold and exhaustion. I have no defense for what I did, what I allowed to happen. Yet here you stand, seeking what? Forgiveness? Eleonora's laugh was brittle. Or have you simply chosen what you believe to be the winning side? I seek neither forgiveness nor safety, he replied. I come to warn you. Sophia knows more about your movement than you realize. There is a traitor among your closest allies. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Rowan stepped forward, hand on sword. An easy claim to make and convenient, sow discord among us without proof. I have proof, Aldrich insisted. Names, dates, details of your operations that have been reported to the castle. Information only someone in this room could know. And we should trust the man who betrayed his own betrothed? Gareth challenged from his position by the door. Aldrich's shoulders slumped. I don't ask for trust, only that you verify what I tell you. Eleonora studied him carefully, searching for deception in the face she had once known better than her own. What she saw instead was exhaustion, regret, and something else. Fear, but not for himself. Why now? She asked quietly. Why risk everything to bring this warning? Because Sophia plans to burn 3 more villages at dawn, he answered, his voice breaking. Millbrook, Riverton, and Oakvale, again. Any place rumored to have sheltered you. She no longer seeks merely to capture you. She wants to erase any trace of hope your name has inspired. The methodical cruelty of it was entirely believable. Exactly the escalation Sophia would conceive to crush growing resistance. Eleonora felt cold dread settle in her stomach. If you speak truth, she said carefully, hundreds of innocent lives hang in the balance. I know, Aldrich replied simply. That is why I came. Whatever you think of me, whatever punishment you deem fitting for my betrayal, that must wait. Those people have no part in our complicated history. The words struck Eleonora with unexpected force. This was what her exile had taught her, that the struggles of common folk continued regardless of royal dramas, that their lives mattered beyond their usefulness to noble schemes. Take him away, she ordered the guards. Keep him under watch. I need to consult with my advisors. After Aldrich had been led out, heated debate erupted among Eleonora's inner circle. Thorne and several others advocated dismissing the prince's warning as a trap. Rowan counseled caution, but suggested sending scouts to verify the troop movements. Magnus remained suspiciously silent throughout. We cannot risk ignoring this, Eleonora decided finally. If Aldrich speaks truth, Hundreds of innocent people will die because we were too cautious. And if he lies? Challenged Thorne. If we spread our forces thin based on false information, leaving you vulnerable to capture or worse, then I will face that consequence, she answered. But I will not have more villages burned in my name while I did nothing. The decision made, Eleonora found herself alone in the hunting lodge's small side chamber, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The prince's unexpected appearance had reopened wounds she had believed healed, or at least scarred over. A soft knock at the door revealed Rowan, his expression grave. Your Highness, there's something else you should know. While searching the prince, we found this. He held out a small object that caught the firelight, a delicate silver ring set with a single sapphire. Eleonora recognized it instantly. She had left it behind in her hasty flight from the castle. It had been her mother's, given to her on her 16th birthday. He kept it, she whispered, taking the ring with trembling fingers. All this time. He said to tell you, I kept one promise at least, Rowan reported uncomfortably. He wouldn't explain further. Eleonora closed her fist around the ring, memories flooding back unbidden. The night before the betrothal feast, Aldrich had sworn to her that her mother's ring would someday be returned to her as a wedding band, a private promise between lovers, known to no one else. Leave me, she said quietly, and Rowan bowed before withdrawing. Alone, Eleonora opened her palm to stare at the ring, a relic from her previous life that seemed to belong to another person entirely. Outside, she could hear her growing force preparing for dawn, sharpening weapons, checking horses, organizing into the units she had helped train over these months of exile. The question that tormented her was no longer simply one of strategy or politics, but cut to the core of who she had become. Could she trust the man who had first betrayed her? And if his warning proved true, what then? What place could Aldrich possibly have in the new world she fought to create? As dawn approached, Eleonora made her decision. She would act on the warning, but keep Aldrich under guard. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford, not when lives hung in the balance, not when her heart remained such a treacherous battlefield. Flames licked the pre-dawn sky, casting an unnatural orange glow over the countryside. From her position on the ridge, Eleonora could see the village of Millbrook burning below, another community sacrificed to her sister's vengeful madness. They had arrived too late to prevent the attack, but not too late to witness its horrific aftermath. Houses that had stood for generations were reduced to smoldering frames, livestock slaughtered in their pens, the village well deliberately poisoned with the carcasses of sheep. The Queen's forces left an hour before we arrived, reported Gareth, his face streaked with soot from helping survivors. They rode north, toward Riverton. Aldrich's warning had proven true. Sophia had indeed ordered the destruction of villages rumored to support Eleonora. What he hadn't known, or perhaps hadn't revealed, was that the attacks had been staggered rather than simultaneous. Millbrook first, then Riverton, with Oakvale targeted for the following dawn. How many? Eleonora asked, her voice hollow. 19 dead, 34 injured, the rest fled into the forest. Gareth hesitated before adding, they killed the children first, made the parents watch. Bile rose in Eleonora's throat. This wasn't warfare. It was methodical terror designed to break the spirit of any who might oppose the crown. Each atrocity committed in her father's name blackened the royal seal she had once been proud to bear. Gather the survivors, she commanded. Any who can travel come with us. The injured go to the sanctuary at Mistwood Monastery. And the prince? Rowan asked, glancing toward where Aldrich stood under guard, helping pull a trapped family from beneath a collapsed roof, despite his bound hands. Keep him restrained, but allow him to help, she decided. His warning was accurate, if incomplete. That earns him the right to prove himself further. As the grim day wore on, survivors were gathered, wounds tended, the dead honored with hasty but dignified burials. Through it all, Eleonora moved among the displaced villagers, listening to their stories, memorizing names, promising justice that increasingly felt beyond her power to deliver. An elderly man clutched her hand as she helped him onto a cart. My granddaughter said you'd come. He wheezed through smoke-damaged lungs. Said the true queen walks among her people. I am no queen. Eleonora replied softly. Not yet, the old man said with surprising conviction. But soon. By midday, their caravan of survivors and fighters moved north through forest paths known only to local hunters, racing to reach Riverton before Sophia's forces. The mood was somber but determined, grief hardening into resolve with each mile traveled. What had begun as a scattered resistance was transforming into something more cohesive. Farmers walked alongside former royal guards, village blacksmiths compared notes with military armorers, women who had never held weapons before practiced with daggers as they marched. Eleonora rode at the front beside Rowan, acutely aware of Aldrich's presence 3 riders behind. She had avoided direct interaction with him since the confirmation of his warning, unsure whether to feel vindication or deeper betrayal that he had spoken truth. We're nearly 300 strong now, Rowan noted, gesturing to the growing column behind them, with more joining from each village. 300 against the royal army, Eleonora replied grimly. Most untrained, poorly equipped, but fighting for their homes, their families. Rowan's scarred face softened momentarily. I've led professional soldiers who fought for gold. Give me farmers defending their children any day. As they crested a hill overlooking Riverton, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. Instead of another burning village, they found barricades erected around the settlement's perimeter. Villagers armed with farming implements stood alongside a small contingent of soldiers bearing the Queen's colors, but with strips of blue cloth tied around their arms, the color of Eleonora's house. More defectors, Gareth explained, riding up beside them. Captain Elias and 20 of his men refused orders to burn the village. They've joined with the locals to defend it. A cheer went up from the column as word spread, the first hopeful sound Eleonora had heard in days. The symbolic impact was powerful. Queen Sophia's own forces were beginning to turn against her. By nightfall, their numbers had swelled to nearly 500. Campfires dotted the hills around Riverton, each surrounded by people sharing stories, skills, and increasingly, songs of resistance. Eleonora moved from fire to fire, listening more than speaking, learning the names and grievances of those who now looked to her for leadership. Near midnight, she found herself alone at the edge of camp, staring toward the distant silhouette of the castle just visible on the horizon, the home that had never truly been hers, now transformed into a symbol of everything she fought against. They say the Queen hasn't been seen in public for 3 days, came Aldrich's voice from behind her. Eleonora didn't turn. Should you not still be under guard, Your Highness? Your captain thought you might want to hear my latest information directly. Aldrich moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. His hands were no longer bound, she noticed, though a guard stood watchfully 20 paces away. Sophia grows increasingly paranoid. She's dismissed half the castle staff, suspecting spies everywhere. With good reason, Eleonora observed coolly. Indeed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your network has grown impressive. Kitchen maids, stable hands, even her personal handmaiden, all feeding information to your cause. The acknowledgement of her accomplishments from the man who had once betrayed her stirred complicated emotions Eleonora had no time to examine. Why are you really here, Aldrich? She asked abruptly. Not just to warn us about village attacks. You could have sent a messenger for that. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice carried the weight of months of regret. Because I was a coward, he said simply. I stood by while your sister plotted your downfall. I convinced myself it was for the greater good, that one betrayal, however painful, would prevent civil war. He gestured toward the campfires behind them. Instead, I became part of creating the very conflict I feared. Eleonora finally turned to look at him directly. The moonlight softened the new lines in his face but couldn't hide the haunted look in his eyes. And now, she prompted. Now I know there are worse things than conflict, he answered. Tyranny, injustice, the slow death of everything good in the kingdom. He met her gaze directly. I don't expect forgiveness, Eleonora. I don't deserve it. But I can help you stop what Sophia has become. Before she could respond, urgent footsteps approached. Thorne appeared, his expression grave. Your Highness, Scouts report the Queen's main force is mobilized, at least 800 soldiers marching from the castle. They'll reach us by midday tomorrow. The news sent ice through Eleonora's veins. Their growing rebellion had finally provoked a direct response, not just terror tactics against villages, but a military confrontation they could not possibly win. She comes herself, Aldrich added quietly. Sophia will lead the attack. She's declared that any village harboring you will be razed to the ground, its inhabitants executed as traitors. She intends to make an example that will extinguish your support forever. An emergency council was convened immediately, gathered around maps spread on a makeshift table. Options were few and grim: scatter into the forests and continue guerrilla resistance, attempt to defend Riverton against overwhelming odds, or retreat to the mountains, abandoning the villagers to Sophia's vengeance. As arguments grew heated, a messenger arrived bearing an unexpected communication, a letter sealed with the royal crest, carried by a herald who waited at the edge of camp under a flag of truce. Eleonora broke the seal, her expression remaining carefully neutral as she read the contents. When she finally looked up, the council fell silent, waiting. "My sister offers terms," she announced. "I am to surrender myself at dawn. In exchange, she will spare Riverton and grant amnesty to all who have supported me, excepting the military deserters." "It's a trap," Rowan said immediately. "She'll never honor such terms." "Of course it is," Eleonora agreed. "But it tells us something important. She fears what we've built here. She fears what might happen if she slaughters hundreds of common folk who support my claim." The realization sent a current of energy through the council. For the first time, they glimpsed vulnerability in their seemingly invincible enemy. "We cannot meet her army in open battle," Eleonora continued, "but perhaps we don't need to." Her finger traced a path on the map from Riverton to the castle. "The people are what give me strength, not just as fighters, but as the very foundation of my claim. If Sophia fears their support enough to offer false amnesty, perhaps it's time we show her exactly how many stand against her." A daring plan took shape as the night progressed, not a traditional military strategy, but something new. Messengers were dispatched to every sympathetic village within a day's ride. By dawn, hundreds more had joined their ranks, not just fighters, but farmers carrying scythes, bakers with rolling pins, blacksmiths with hammers, mothers with babes in arms. As the sun crested the horizon, Eleonora stood before the assembled crowd, no longer just a band of rebels, but the beginnings of a people's army. Dressed not in royal finery but in the practical garments of her exile, she raised her voice to address those who had risked everything to follow her. "Today, we march not just for a crown or a title," she called out, her voice carrying across the hushed assembly. "We march for justice, for homes burned and children slaughtered, for taxes that steal the bread from your tables, for a kingdom where power serves the people, not the other way around." A roar of approval rose from the crowd, growing louder as she continued. "Queen Sophia expects an army. Let us show her something far more powerful, a kingdom united against tyranny." As they began their march toward the castle, word arrived that Sophia's forces had been spotted on the main road. The two sides would meet on the open plain before the castle walls, not in the forest battle Sophia had planned, but in full view of the countryside and any who cared to witness. Eleonora rode at the front of her unlikely army, flanked by Rowan and, surprisingly, Aldrich, who had been granted conditional freedom after providing crucial details about the castle's defenses. Behind them walked not ranks of trained soldiers, but ordinary people by the thousands, their faces set with determination that transcended fear. As they crested the final hill before the plain, the castle came into view, its stone walls gleaming in the midday sun, banners flying from every tower. Before it, arranged in perfect military formation, waited Queen Sophia's army, professional soldiers with gleaming armor and sharpened weapons. And there, at the center, sat Sophia herself on a white charger, crown glinting upon her dark hair, her face a mask of cold fury, visible even at this distance. For a breathless moment, the two forces regarded each other across the field, one a picture of military might, the other a living embodiment of the realm itself. Then, To everyone's shock, the massive oak doors of the castle opened. A lone figure emerged, walking slowly but purposefully toward the space between the armies. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking King Edmund, Eleonora, and Sophia's father, thought to be incapacitated or worse for months. The chess pieces were arranged. The kingdom held its breath. And Eleonora, the princess who had lost everything only to discover her true strength, prepared to face both her sister and her past in a confrontation that would determine the future of the realm. Time itself seemed to slow as King Edmund advanced into the open ground between the two forces. He moved with the careful deliberation of a man recently recovered from grave illness, or perhaps, Eleonora thought with a chill, recently freed from imprisonment. His once robust frame appeared diminished, his shoulders stooped beneath the weight of the royal mantle, yet his eyes remained clear and alert, taking in the extraordinary tableau before him. On one side, his younger daughter Sophia sat rigidly atop her white charger, crown gleaming in the midday sun, surrounded by the precision ranks of the royal army, 800 professional soldiers with polished armor and razor-sharp weapons, the embodiment of traditional power. On the other, his elder daughter Eleonora stood at the head of a force unlike any the kingdom had ever witnessed. Farmers with pitchforks, blacksmiths with hammers, mothers with kitchen knives, interspersed with deserters from the royal army and hunters with bows. Their weapons were improvised, their ranks uneven, but their faces carried something the royal forces lacked: absolute conviction. "Father," Sophia called out, her voice carrying across the field, "return to the castle. These traitors seek to overthrow the rightful order of succession." King Edmund paused, his gaze moving slowly from one daughter to the other. When he spoke, his voice was weaker than Eleonora remembered, but firm with resolution. "I see no traitors here," he said. "Only my firstborn daughter and the people she has sworn to protect." A ripple of reaction passed through both armies, murmurs from Sophia's soldiers, a swell of hope from Eleonora's supporters. Sophia's face contorted with fury. "You are unwell, father," she snapped. "Your mind is confused by recent illness. Remember, it was Eleonora who fled the kingdom rather than accept your decision regarding succession." "A decision I never made," the king replied, loud enough for all to hear. "A proclamation issued in my name while I was indisposed." The implication hung in the air, damning in its simplicity. Eleonora felt a complex surge of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also deep sorrow for what her father must have endured, for what the kingdom had suffered due to one person's ruthless ambition. "Enough of this charade," Sophia hissed, drawing her sword. A symbolic gesture meant more for her troops than for actual combat. "Arrest the traitors, all of them." For a terrible moment, Eleonora feared a massacre was about to unfold. Her ragtag force, for all its passion and numbers, would be devastated in direct combat with trained soldiers. She prepared to move forward, to place herself bodily between her supporters and her sister's wrath. But the expected charge never came. Instead, a lone figure detached from Sophia's front line, walking his horse forward to stand beside the king. Captain Halford, commander of the Royal Guard, a man who had served their family for 3 decades. "Your Majesty," he addressed King Edmund, pointedly ignoring Sophia, "the Royal Guard awaits your command." The significance was unmistakable. In that simple statement, the captain had transferred his allegiance back to the king, and by extension, rejected Sophia's authority. "Traitor!" Sophia shrieked, her composure shattering. "I'll have your head for this." More soldiers began to step forward from Sophia's lines, first individually, then in small groups, creating a growing contingent around the king. Not a majority. Most remained loyally behind Sophia, but enough to signal a devastating fracture in her support. Eleonora watched this unfold with growing hope, yet remained wary. This delicate moment could still explode into bloodshed. Stepping forward, she raised her voice to address not her sister, but the soldiers still loyal to her. "Men of the royal army," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "I do not come seeking vengeance or power. I come seeking justice for a kingdom that has suffered under tyranny. Look around you." She gestured to the people standing behind her. "These are not rebels. They are the very people you swore to protect. Bakers who made your bread, farmers who grew your food, blacksmiths who forged your swords. She took another step forward, now fully exposed and vulnerable. I have lived among them these past months. I have seen their suffering firsthand. Villages burned, children orphaned, elderly left to starve, all in the name of a crown that should protect, not destroy. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of wind across the plain and the nervous shuffling of horses. Eleonora continued, her voice dropping slightly so that all had to strain to hear, forcing them to listen more carefully. I do not ask you to betray your oaths. I ask you to remember the true purpose of those oaths, to serve the realm and its people. Not to slaughter innocent villagers, not to collect taxes that leave children starving. Not to enforce the will of one person against the good of many. More soldiers began to shift uncomfortably, looking to their commanders for guidance. Some lowered their weapons slightly. Others glanced back at the castle, as if seeing for the first time what they had been defending, not a kingdom, but one woman's grip on power. Sophia, sensing the momentum shifting, played her final card. She conspires with our enemies, she shouted. The northern kingdoms prepare for invasion while she weakens us from within. She would surrender our sovereignty for her personal revenge. It was a desperate lie, but delivered with enough conviction that it caused hesitation among the wavering troops. Aldrich chose this moment to urge his horse forward, stopping beside Eleonora. Though no longer bound, he wore no weapons, presenting himself as vulnerable as she was. I have seen the royal correspondence, he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his royal breeding. There are no threats from the north, no impending invasions, only fabrications designed to justify oppression of our own people. His public declaration, standing openly beside Eleonora, created another seismic shift in the delicate balance. The prince, technically still Sophia's husband in the eyes of law, had made his choice unmistakably clear. Sophia's face contorted with rage. "Kill them!" she shrieked at her remaining loyal guards. "Kill them all!" A handful of soldiers raised their weapons, but hesitated, unwilling to be the first to spill blood in what was increasingly appearing to be a lost cause. Sensing their reluctance, Sophia yanked her horse around, drawing her own sword and spurring directly toward Eleonora in a desperate single-handed charge. What happened next occurred so swiftly that witnesses later disagreed on the exact sequence of events. King Edmund moved with unexpected agility to place himself in Sophia's path. Captain Halford and several guards rushed forward to intercept the queen. Aldrich reached for Eleonora, attempting to pull her aside. Amid the chaos, Eleonora stood her ground. As Sophia bore down upon her, sword raised for a killing blow, Eleonora raised not a weapon, but her open, empty hand. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the turmoil with unexpected authority. Whether it was the shock of her sister's fearlessness or some remnant of familial bond, Sophia pulled her horse up short, her blade stopping mere inches from Eleonora's upraised palm. For a heartbeat, the sisters locked eyes, one consumed by hatred and desperation, the other offering something unexpected: pity. "It's over, Sophia," Eleonora said quietly. Not with blood, but with truth. The royal guards surrounded them now, gently but firmly taking control of Sophia's horse. The fight visibly drained from the younger princess as she realized the totality of her defeat. Her soldiers were laying down arms across the field, kneeling not in surrender to an enemy, but in recognition of their rightful monarch's return. King Edmund approached his daughters, years of grief etched into his face. "The crown has never been about power," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It has always been about responsibility, to the people, to the land, to justice." He turned to address the assembled crowd, soldiers and commoners alike. "Today I have witnessed something I never thought possible. A ruler who truly understands this burden because she has lived among those she would govern." To Eleonora's shock, her father slowly removed the royal signet ring from his finger, the symbol of the monarch's authority, more powerful than any crown. "My daughter," he said, holding it toward her, "you left these grounds a princess. You returned something far greater, a leader worthy of this realm." Eleonora stared at the ring, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes upon her. This was the moment she had once dreamed of. Restoration, vindication, power rightfully returned. Yet she found herself hesitating, the experiences of her exile forever altering her understanding of what leadership truly meant. "I accept this responsibility," she said finally, her voice carrying across the hushed field, "not as a right of birth, but as a sacred trust." She took the ring but did not immediately place it on her finger. Instead, she turned to address the people who had followed her, the farmers and blacksmiths, the tavern keepers and village healers. "I stand before you not because of royal blood, but because you chose to stand with me. The true strength of this kingdom lies not in its castle walls or crown jewels, but in the hands that build its homes, grow its food, raise its children, and defend its values." She placed the ring upon her finger. Then, in a gesture that sent whispers rippling through the crowd, she knelt upon the ground, a monarch humbling herself before her people. "I swear to you this day that I will never forget the lessons learned in exile. That the greatest crown is not made of gold, but of the trust placed in a leader by those they serve." One by one, those gathered began to kneel in return. First her closest supporters, then the royal guards. Finally, even the soldiers who had minutes before stood against her. Not in subservience, but in mutual recognition of a covenant renewed between ruler and ruled. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, Eleonora rose to her feet. There would be much to rebuild. Trust to restore, wounds to heal, a system of governance to reform. The road ahead would be neither simple nor swift, but as she looked across the faces of those who had risked everything to stand for justice, she knew with certainty that they would walk this path together. Behind her, Aldrich stood at a respectful distance, neither presuming forgiveness nor seeking restoration to his former position. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd, a look that acknowledged their complicated past while leaving the future unwritten. Some bridges could be rebuilt, others might remain forever broken. Time, not words, would tell their story. As Eleonora turned toward the castle, not as a returning exile but as a leader transformed by suffering into wisdom, the people began to follow, not as subjects, but as partners in the creation of something new, a kingdom where the greatest crown was carried not upon the head, but within the heart. Eleonora's journey from pampered princess to true leader reminds us that sometimes we must lose everything to discover what truly matters. Through suffering and exile, she gained what no royal education could provide: genuine understanding of the people she was born to lead. Her strength came not from her title or bloodline, but from the wisdom earned through hardship and the compassion born of shared struggle. Would you have had her courage? To stand unarmed before an army, to offer forgiveness when vengeance was within reach, to kneel before those you were raised to command. In a world that often rewards power seized through force, Eleonora chose a different path, proving that the most enduring authority comes not from fear, but from mutual respect and shared purpose. This tale of betrayal, redemption, and transformation asks us to consider what truly makes a worthy leader in our own lives. Is it those born to privilege, or those who have walked in the shoes of those they serve? If this story touched your heart, help it reach others who might find meaning in Eleonora's journey. Subscribe to hear more tales that challenge us to look beyond appearances and discover the deeper truths that unite us all. Share with those who appreciate stories where the greatest victories come not from conquering others, but from conquering our own prejudices and limitations.